Shavua Tov. Okay, here we are. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
So I think it's the right time, right? I'm not so good at calculating 45.
Yeah, I guess that was like more or less 45 minutes. I couldn't figure it out either. So different calendars have different times anyway.
That is definitely true. It depends on, which time you're keeping, right?
Exactly.
Okay, but I guess we got James. You have a minute for Hanan, who's probably, I don't know if Hanan's around, but.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, let's get started. We got places to go. So today's a tough daf, I'll say. I think it's a tough daf. Today's Memtat 49. It's incredibly easy in terms of Gemara learning, I would say. So very, very easy. But the topic and the discussion is very unpleasant, in my opinion. So we'll learn it. We'll do it together. We'll see where it goes. But today's daf, so Memtat, I think, I hope. So 49. And we are at the first word on the page. Says the Mishnah. We're just discussing. Well, the truth is, it's not how we got to this Mishnah, but either way, says the Mishnah on the top of the page. Arba Asar Shechaliot b'Shabbat. Let's say the 14th day of Nisan, which is Erev Pesach, is on Shabbat. Now, this is obviously a very important question as to what do you do about the Korban Pesach, right? Because the Korban Pesach is brought on Erev Shabbat, on Erev Pesach, which in the case of Shabbat, is it Docha Shabbat? It is. We're going to discuss this later, in later prakim, many details about that. But we're not at the Korban Pesach yet. If you notice, we haven't got to Korban Pesach. The Masechet is set up. We talk about the night before, right? We're building our way. We're going to do the night before. Now we're talking about Chametz. We're going to do Korban Pesach for a while. And then, of course, at the end, we get to our favorite parak, Arvei Pesachim, right? What happens the night of the Seder. So, but today, let's say you have the 14th day falls on Shabbat. Says the Mishnah, Mevarin et hakol lifnei Shabbat. You should destroy, you should get rid of all your chametz before Shabbat. Divrei Rabbi Meir, of course, with the exception of you need some food for Shabbat, but you should get rid of all excess chametz before Shabbat because there's no way to really get rid of it on Shabbat. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Chachamim omrim bismano. No, you could just leave it all and you get rid of it bismano. How would you get rid of it on Shabbat? You obviously can't burn it, but you can maybe pour it down the drain. You could, crush it up and throw it to the wind. So you can even do that on Shabbat. Rebbe Lazar, Rebbe Tzadok Omer, it depends. Truma, if you have chametz, that's truma. Truma is something that's hard to get rid of because only Kohanim can eat it, right? So you can't give it to your animals, as Rashi points out. You can't give it to guests. So you should get rid of it before Shabbat. You should burn it. You should throw it away because there's no way to get rid of it on Shabbat. Chulin bismana, but chulin, if you have regular food, you can keep it around because you can always try to invite someone to eat it. You invite the neighbors. You could give it to your animals. You can, and if you get stuck, you'll throw it away. Says the Gemara, Tanya V'Letzber Tzadik Omer Pam Achat. I remember as a little boy, Shavat Abba b'Yavna. I spent Shabbat with my father in Yavna. He must have been a little kid. His father was Reb Tzadok. The Chal Arba Tzaliot b'Shabbat. And I remember that year, Erev Pesach was Shabbos, right? Our Seder was Saturday night. Uba Zunin, a man named Zunin, who was Mimuneh Shel Rabbi Gamliel. He was the Mimuneh, I don't know how to translate Mimuneh nicely, but the henchman, I would say. But that's not really what it means. Like the officer, the appointed person of Rabbi Gamliel. Va'amar, and he announced on Friday, Higia ate levaer chametz. It's time to go burn the chametz. V'halachti achar abba ubianu chametz. And I remember going with my father and burning chametz. So, some of us have memories as a little kid of going to the firehouse and burning the chametz. That's my memory. But either way, this was Rabbi Eliezer Tzadok's memory of doing it on Friday afternoon, because clearly Rabbi Gamliel held that you have to burn it before Shabbat. Presumably, we don't know for sure, but it wasn't Truma, so you would hold like the Tanakama, Rabbi Meir, that you burn everything. Okay, continues the Mishnah, second Mishnah of the day. And this is, of course, very relevant. A person is going to Shechter Karban Pesach, which makes sense, right? It's Erev Pesach. They just got on the train from Modi'in to Yerushalayim, right, to go Shechter Karban Pesach. I don't know where the set is. Maybe on the train, maybe it's waiting there for you, I hope. Or you're going Limot Beno, or you're going to do a Brit Milah for a person's son. It's the 8th day, let's say, Erev Pesach, and as it would be. And there's no moel, you got to bring the kid and go get a Brit Milah. Or you're going Lechol Sudat Erusim Beit Chama, where a person gets engaged. Imagine getting engaged on Erev Pesach, right? And you're going to have a Su'udah in the house of your future father-in-law. So, which is a Sudat Mitzvah, to commemorate the Kiddushin. And while you're on the road, you remember that, oh my goodness, I had one extra donut left on the counter. So what do? So if you can get off the train, go back home, get rid of it, and go back to do your mitzvah, then yachzor v'yivaer, you should go back and destroy it. But in lav, if you couldn't, so you would miss out on doing the mitzvah, mivatlo b'libo. You should just be mevatel it in your heart. You should say, that donut sitting on my kitchen counter, it is like nothing to me. Because of course, midoraita, bitol is enough to get rid of it. So that's what you should do. If you can go back, though, you should go back. I mean, if you can go back and still do your mitzvah. Let's say you're going lahatzil min hanachrim. Let's say you're going to save people from non-Jews, meaning like a war, Rashi says. People are fighting and they need you to help. Or min nahar, there's a flood. Or min halistim, there's, how do we try to say listim, but people who mean harm. Min hadleka, or a fire, min hamapolet, or a crushed building, like an earthquake. Then obviously you don't go back, even if you could, right? You don't like calculate, because midoraita, of course, you can just be mevatel. It says the Mishnah, then yivatel b'libo. You should just be mevatel in your heart, and of course, when you go back during Chol HaMoed, make sure you don't eat the donut. And if you're going, says the Mishnah, v'lishbot shvitat harashut, if you're going to rest somewhere for purposes of rashut, meaning just for recreation, Rashi's example, of course, is that you're going on Erev Shabbos to do remember we just learned Erevin, right? So if you want to go on Shabbos more than 2,000 amot from your house, you can go Erev Shabbat, and when Shabbat starts, you're in a spot, 2,000 amot from your house, and then you're Kona Shvita, you're Kona your Shabbat in that place, and you could travel 2,000 amot in any direction. So if, let's say, there was a real important pickup basketball game going on in North Riverdale, 4,000 amot from me, I could go Erev Shabbat and stand at the border, and then the next day I'm able to go. But that's considered reshut, of course. So if that's the case, you got to turn around, forget about your basketball game, and go home and destroy your chametz. I don't think Rashi says basketball, but he says something similar. Rashi said, I forget what he says.
Beit Avel or something?
No, that's the mitzvah. No, Rashi doesn't. He just says Devar Reshut. But he says if it was for a mitzvah that you were going, then obviously that would be like the first case, right? Continues the Mishnah.
So wait a second, just a question, sorry. When you don't get to go back and destroy it, and you destroy it in, virtually, let's say, and you go back home and it's still Pesach, let's say it's Chol HaMoed, do you actually dispose of it then, or do you cover it, or you just like let it sit and pretend that it's not there?
So you should cover it. The question of destroying it depends on we'll see. We're going to discuss a little bit whether it's Yom Tov or Chol HaMoed, right? Because whether you're allowed to burn it or not, because you can't get enough from it.
Let's say it's Chol HaMoed.
Then you should dispose of it. But it depends obviously on what's involved. But yeah, you should dispose of it or burn, destroy it.
But you're not allowed to see it. That's part of the, that's part of it.
Right. But even though you're not allowed to see it, you're not allowed to see your own chametz. Remember, we've talked about this. You can walk down the street and you could look in a store that's selling donuts.
Right.
So once you're Mevatel Belibo, it's not yours, it's Hefker, even though it's sitting on.
Okay.
Right? But we still want you to get rid of it because when we discussed this a little bit earlier, that there's still, you don't want to have it there, even if it's not yours, which is partly why we do Padika. Right?
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Continues the Mishnah. Now there's another rule which is related just because of the travel, which is that if a person has, remember, Kachim column, right, have to be eaten within the Mechitza of Yerushalayim, within the walls of Yerushalayim. If you carry them outside of Yerushalayim, they become pasul, because they're not allowed to go. They're limited to inside Yerushalayim. Let's say, and if that happens, you have to bring them back and burn them because they're no longer kosher. But let's say Yerushalayim, you're traveling out of Yerushalayim, but you just had your shlomim, you ate all day, you're leaving Yerushalayim, you're halfway out of the city and you realize that you're still carrying some meat that you're not supposed to have. So says the Mishnah, Im avart Sofim, if you passed Sofim, Rash's Sofim is some village that you can still see the Beit HaMikdash. I don't know if it's Harat Sofim that we call today, but Sofim literally means you can see, right? So it was distinctive because you could see the Beit HaMikdash from that city, or that village, not city, right? So if you passed Sofim, then we don't make you go back because it's a big trip. I don't know if the trip means an hour or 5 hours, like what the context is. But if you go past that area, Sarfobim Komo, you should just burn the kachim where you are, because that's what you have to do with kachim. That's pasul. But in lav, if you're closer than Sofim, then you should go back. You should burn it in the Beit HaMikdash, which is where you, or at least outside the Beit HaMikdash, but in the complex from the wood of the maracha, which is the ideal thing to do for kachim that are pasul. Ask the Mishnah, the ad kama hin chozrim, for how much do you have to go back? And Rashi understands this is referring to, well, we'll see why. Everyone understands. This is referring to both. If you have basar or if you have chametz. What if you go on and you remember, I have 2 crumbs left on my kitchen table that I forgot to sweep up? Right? What's the shear that you have to go back for in cases where you have to go back? So Rabbi Meir Omer Zeb kibetza. Both this halacha of Pesach and the halacha of Kachim is a kibetza, the size of an egg, which is 2 kazetim, right? A reasonable size. Not so big, but a reasonable size. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Zeb kizayit. Rabbi Yehuda says both are kizayit, which is a smaller size. V'chachamim Omrim, it depends. Basar kodesh b'kizayit, v'chametz b'kibetza. That if it's meat, it's a kazai, which is a smaller shear. If it's chametz, it's only a size of a kibetza, and the Gemara will discuss what this is based on. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Says the Gemara for Aminu. I don't get it. There's a Braita which seems to contradict our Mishnah. The Braita says, if you're going to have your engagement, now remember, Erusin is not what we call engagement. It was like Kiddushin. You really are, after Erusin, you're not allowed, the woman is not allowed to sleep or marry someone else, and she needs a get if they want to separate, right? It's a real contract. So if you go to eat the Sudat Erusin Beit Chamav, or Lishvot Shvitat HaRashut, or you're going to do something that's just, not required, you just want, like my case, you want to go play basketball, then Yachzor Miyad, you should go back. So how do you understand? Our Mishnah said that if you're going to make a Sudat Erusin, that's a Sudat Mitzvah. And you don't have to go back unless you can go back and still get to the meal. But the Braita seems to say that it's the same thing as Rashut. Rabbi Yochanan, it's true. Lo kasha Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi. There's a machloket Tanaim whether a Sudat Erusin is considered a Sudat Mitzvah. The Tanya, the Braita says, Sudat Erusin Rashut. The Rabbi Yehuda says it's not considered a Sudat Mitzvah. It's just Rashut. You don't have to have a meal. It's not, even though it's over a special occasion, we don't consider that to be a Sudat Mitzvah. And so therefore it's fine, but if you forget your chametz, you got to go back and skip the wedding. And I'm sure you'll go over very well with the father-in-law. Rabbi Yossi says mitzvah. Rabbi Yossi says it's a mitzvah. So that's the explanation for why our Mishnah says one thing and the Braita says another thing. But says the Gemara, the truth is Hashtadam Rav Chisda. Now that Rav Chisda pointed out that in fact there is a much more nuanced part of this argument. Machloket b'suda shni'ah. The machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi about whether a Sudat Erusin is a mitzvah or not is not talking about the first meal. The tradition was, presumably, according to it seems, that you would get engaged, right? The man would pop the question maybe, or whatever, however they did it, and he would say, Ariyat Mikudeshetli, and make a kinyan, and that's the Sudat, and then you'd have a Sudat right then, that's called Sudat Erusin. That was, everyone agrees that's a Sudat mitzvah. The issue was that they used to have a second meal, that after at the house of the Chatan, they would then send over gifts and food and everything to the house of the chamiv, of the kala, right, of the father-in-law, and go and have a second Sudat Erusin in the house of the woman's family. And the question is that second meal considered to be Sudat Mitzvah or a continuation of the first Sudat Mitzvah, or is that just, social norms? You got to do it because everyone else does it. So how do you view that second meal? So says Reb Chisda, machloket b'suda shniya. The machloket, whether it's a Sudat Mitzvah, is about the second meal. Aval b'suda rishona divrei kol mitzvah. Everyone agrees that the first meal that is associated with marriage is a mitzvah. And if that's true, then afilu temo hav Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah and the Braita could both be Rabbi Yehuda. In the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says it's a Sudat mitzvah because he's talking about the first meal. And the Braita says it's a Sudat Reshut because he's talking about the second meal. So hav Rabbi Yehuda, v'lo kasher, hav b'sudah rishona, hav b'sudah shniya. And that's in fact what the following Braita seems to say, Tanya. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, ani lo shamati al Sudat Erusin. I only heard that it's a Sudat mitzvah, the meal that you have right when you get engaged, the Sudat Erusin. Avalo savlonut. But not the gift. Rashi savlonut means not pain, not savlonut like we call it.
Impatience.
But here it means doronot. It means gifts, right? Bribery, maybe, I don't know, but gifts, right? So you would send over. It would be the tradition that the chatan would send over Rashi's kelim naim, nice pots, nice things, nice cloths to the house of the woman's family, and that meal is not a Sudat mitzvah. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Yossi, I disagree. Ani shamati Sudat Erusin v'savlanut. I heard that both of them are Sudat mitzvah. And that, therefore, back to our Mishnah, if it's a Sudat mitzvah, you could leave your chametz behind and go do your mitzvah. And if you can do both, you do both. Now, for the rest of today's daf, till the last 5 lines, we're going to digress to a whole Agadata, which is, I would say, one of the most, I'm trying the right words. It's a challenging Agadata. It's one of the most, let me put it this way, it would get you banned from Twitter. Okay, let's start with
that doesn't take much nowadays.
That's relative, right? Even in the old days, it might get you banned. But either way, it's a very famous Agadata. It's not everything is unique here. There are many of these things that are repeated elsewhere. But really, they put together all of the, let's say, enmity between Talmidei Chachamim and Am Haratzim, right? Between I guess the Talmidei Chachamim are what we're going to call the authors of the Gemara. That's the perspective you're going to hear it from, and what's called an Am Haaretz. Obviously, there's a tremendous debate throughout history. What's an Am Haaretz? Like, what does that mean? And so we'll see even in the Gemara that a lot of what they say is not so consistent. I mean, everything's negative, but there's like levels of negative. And so you'll see, some say Am Haaretz, you hear all kinds of things nowadays. Of course, a lot of it's what we call apologetics, right? That it doesn't apply to people today. People don't know better, or everyone knows something. But many Rishonim talk about Am Haaretz in this context as someone who's Jewish, but very anti-Torah, or acts against the Torah, acts against Talmidei Chachamim. To what extent this actually existed or was just in the imagination or the fear of the Chachamim is unknown. I don't really know the history, but they're going to have a lot of unkind things to say about those people. So let's start from the beginning. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon said, Kol su'udah she'eino shel mitzvah, ein talmid chacham rashai lihenot mimenu. Any su'udah that's not a su'udat mitzvah, if a person's talmid chacham, they shouldn't just be at So now, we'll see the context in a second. But meaning, a talmid chacham should not go to a su'udah that doesn't celebrate something that's a mitzvah. Okay, Kigon Mai says, what's an example? What do you mean by that? So we don't mean a 4th of July barbecue. What we mean, says Rabbi Yochanan, which maybe you shouldn't do either, but that's not what we mean. Says Rabbi Yochanan, Kigon Bat Kohen Li Yisrael. Like a marriage, it's really inappropriate. So it shouldn't happen, and Talmid Chacham should not be there to support that. What's an example? If a Bat Kohen marries a non-Kohen, which really. Okay, we'll see. We're going to get to it in a second. Like a Bat Kohen should marry, because really a Bat Kohen should marry a Kohen to keep the together. And so that's the best thing. A Talmid Chacham should not go to that kind of wedding. Or
the Kohen is through the patrilineal.
It is, but there's, okay, I don't, or for example, about Talmid Chacham la'am haaretz, or the daughter of a Talmid Chacham marrying a person who's an Am Haaretz. That also is inappropriate. And a Talmid Chacham should not go to that kind of su'udah.
These aren't forbidden. They're just looked down upon.
Correct. It's so
There's
far.
not that many Kohanim. I mean, I've never heard that it's not.
Wait, hold on. Don't go home yet. Amar Rabbi Yochanan.
It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, Hanan.
No. I mean, I never heard.
Just be patient. I'm not saying it's going to solve everything, but let's hear the Gemara out. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Bat Kohen li Yisrael. If a daughter of a Kohen marries a Yisrael, ein zivugon ole yafeh. Their union, right? Their zivug won't end up well. Mikey, what does that mean? It's not going to end up well. Amar Rav Chisda, o almana, she'll be widowed, o grusha, or divorced, o zera einla, or they'll have no children. And the matnita tana, in the Mishnah we learn, the Braita, we learn, kovra, she'll bury him, o kovrato, or he'll bury her, or she'll bury him, o mivia de aniyut, or it'll lead to they'll become poor. They won't have a sufficient.
What's all the Braita?
This is all a Braita, yeah.
Okay.
Ask the Gemara, Aini, is that true? V'ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan elsewhere, when he was giving marriage advice, said, "Harotzeh sheyit asher." If a person wants to become rich, not happy but rich, yidabek b'zaro shel Aaron. A person should marry a Kohen, because remember the Kohanim. I'm not sure on what historical basis, but remember the tradition is that the Ketorah makes you rich, and so the people who do the Ketorah and the Kohanim are you get a schut of wealth from being with them. Right? Kol shekain shetorah v'kunam shartan. Certainly, if a person has Torah and they marry a bat kohen, they should become rich. So, what do you mean you can't marry a bat kohen if you're a Yisrael? It says, "Lo kasha habe talmid chacham habe am haaretz." It depends whether you're a talmid chacham or an am haaretz. So that a talmid chacham certainly is not necessarily a bad thing for a bat kohen to marry Yisrael as a talmid chacham. But Yisrael is an am haaretz, or maybe neutral, a bat kohen should not marry. Of course, we just said the same thing true about a bat talmid chacham, shouldn't marry an am haaretz, and a person who has the choice shouldn't participate or respect and honor that union.
My great grandmother was a Bat Kohen.
So you can be rich, I guess. Rabbi Yeshua Nasiv Kahanta. Now, Rabbi Yeshua, again, we're going to get to the stories here. The Marshal here tries to explain some of them, but there isn't really much hope to find consistency. But either way, it's our Gemara. Rabbi Yeshua Nasif Kahanta, Rabbi Yeshua, who was not a Kohen, married a Bat Kohen, Chalash, and he got sick. He got some kind of, chronic disease. Omar, he said, this is a sign from Hashem. Lo nichale la'aron da'adbik bizare. It's not Aaron or Aaron's family, the Kohanim, don't want me to be part of their zera, to have a son-in-law like me. So it doesn't say he divorced his wife, but I don't know. He just said that, maybe I crossed the line. And I'm not sure what the next is. Did he not, he was married to her, but that's what he said. Rav Idi bar Avin Nasib Kahanta. Rav Idi bar Avin married the daughter of a Kohen, and Nafka B'nei Smicha. He was zocha to have two children, which was, who won a Nobel Prize, who got smicha. So two outstanding children. So the opposite, this worked out really well for him. Rav Sheshet, and the kids were, he was Rav Idi. So the two kids were Rav Sheshet, Rav Idi, and Rav Yeshua, Rav Idi. So it turned out well for him. So again, why, for some people we say it's good, and some people it's bad, it's not really clear. Amar of Papa, Ilo Nasivna Kahanta Lo Yatri. If I hadn't married the daughter of a Kohen, I would never be rich. So I guess it worked out for him too. Amar Rav Kahana said, now Tosas is very bothered because we always thought that Rav Kahana was a Kohen, but it turns out he's not, according to this Gemara at least. Said Rav Kahana, Ilo Nasivna Kahanta Lo Galai. If I hadn't married a Bat Kohen, I would have not been kicked out of my house. So he took it negatively. Rav Kahana was born in Bavel, and he was forced to flee his house as a refugee because of some claim in the kingdom, whatever charge. So he had to flee his house as a refugee, and he blamed it on his decision to marry a Bat Kohen, which again, the Marsha is like, what do you mean? You said a Talmid Chacham is fine. How could Rav Kahana? So says Marsha, maybe he didn't think he was Talmid Chacham or whatever. I don't know what that means, So I don't really understand how you explain all these words, but either way, that's what he said. Amrulay, they said to him, well, Rav Kahana, I know you were exiled and a refugee, but you were a refugee to Israel, right? He went from Bavel back to Eretz Yisrael. So hamakom Torah galita. It's not like you were, you didn't end up in the middle of nowhere. So he says it's true. but lo galai the gali inchi. Everyone else made a choice to make aliyah. I was the one who was kicked out of my home and had to go, under threat of darkness and violence. So I happened to me because I married a bat kohen, and I wasn't necessarily zocha. I wasn't necessarily right to do that. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, says Rabbi Yitzchak, kol hanena misudat rashut. Right, we started off by saying that a talmid chacham should not go to a meal that's not appropriate. But here we're saying if anyone is naneh from a sudat rashut, just a sudah that has no mitzvah or nothing positive, I guess, associated with it, then l'sof goleh, that person is going to end up going to galut. Shenemar v'ochlim karim mitzor v'agalim mitok marbek. The pasuk speaks a lot about eating these delicious, fancy agalim and so on. You're eating all this good meat. It says, therefore, you're going to end up being exiled in the beginning of the exile because you just sat around eating, fancy meat all day. So that's not a good thing. Tanu Rabbanan continues the Braita on the same theme. I hope we don't ate dinner yet. Kol Talmid Chacham Hamar Besudato B'chol Makom. Any Talmid Chacham who starts eating in all kinds of places. Rashi says it means he goes out. He's just eating. He or she, I guess, is eating excessively and getting a taste for fine food and good meats and wine. Then Sof Machrivet Beito. Eventually, it's going to destroy his house because the Marsha says because he'll get a taste for fine things and he'll start borrowing money so he can buy fancy meat and wine. And Ma'almena Tishto, it will make his wife a widow. Rashi here says, which is embarrassing to me, Rashi says that he's going to have to work so hard that he'll have to be at the office all the time, and so his wife and family will never see him. Umiyatemet goes love, and he will make orphans of his children. The Talmudom he'll forget everything he knows because there won't have any time to learn because he's got to work to make food or whatever. Umachlokot rabot ba'ot, he'll have all kinds of arguments because what happens to people when they once knew something and then they forget it, right? They think they still knew it, and so he's going to have all kinds of doubts in his life. Udvarav einam nishmaim, no one's going to take him seriously anymore. Umechalel shem shamayim, he'll end up desecrating Hashem, v'shem rabo, v'shem aviv, and his teacher and his father. V'gorem shem ra lo ulevanav l'bnei banav ad sof kol hadorot. Wow. So think about that before you have the next, steak. Now, Maihi, what does that mean? It's going to be a shem ra. Amarbayo karle bar mechim tanure. They'll call him the man who heats up the oven. This guy, he walks down the street, everyone starts turning on their oven because he's going to be eating, he gets a bad reputation for being gluttonous. Rava Amar bar markid bekuvi. They'll call him the one who dances at the pubs, right? He's out there dancing for food and drink because he's always going out. Rav Papa Amar bar malachich pinchi, the one who is licking the plates always. Shemaya Amar bar machreva, the one who folds up his clothing, which means that he's sleeping on the streets because he doesn't have time to go back home or he's too drunk or whatever, and so he has to fold up his clothes to be under his head as a pillow. So none of these are very nice things, and so they are critiquing people who are gluttonous and just looking for fine food and things of that nature. Tanu Rabbanan, on a related topic, the Olam, says the Braita, Yimpar Adam Kol Ma Sheyesh Lo V'Yisi Bat Talmid Chacham. If a person, is poor or whatever, they don't have a lot, they should give up everything they have. They should sell everything they have in order to have the opportunity to marry the daughter of a Talmid Chacham. Why? She'emet o goleh, if that person, unfortunately, this was more common back in their days, but it's true in any time, right? A person may not be around to raise their family. So if the person dies or he's exiled, he can't be around, then muftach lo shebanav tamidei chachamim, right? He'll know that even though he's not present to raise his children and his family the way he wants to, that by marrying into a family which grew up that way, that his children will learn those values. But al yisabat amaretz, you shouldn't marry the daughter of amaretz, even if he has the skill to teach and educate his children, because you never know if you're going to be around. Shemeit o goleh, if he dies or is exiled, then his banav amei haratzim, then his children will also be not knowledgeable.
If the father dies.
If the father dies, correct. So
So,
the point is that you can't rely on yourself, right? You can't say, I'll educate them my way. You never know if you're going to have the opportunity to educate your children and to raise the family. So you should, make sure that you give up everything you have so that the rest of the house is able to do that.
you mean the wife?
That's what it says, yeah. But it could also mean her family, because you never know, right? So they might go back to her family. But yes, it says a bat Talmid Chacham. Doesn't say anything about her, to be honest with you. But
Right,
the
well, you're
assumption
saying,
is,
yeah.
the assumption is that we're talking about a bat Talmid
He's
Chacham
educated too, or something, right?
who has those traits, I guess.
That's interesting.
Taner Rabbanan continues the bright Olam Yimkar Adam Kol Ma Sheyesh Lo V'Yisa Bat Talmid Chacham. A person should sell and give up any amount of money to marry themselves, to marry a Bat Talmid Chacham, and to Yisa Bito Talmid Chacham. Person should give up all their money, which is what you have to do nowadays, to marry off their children, their daughters to Talmidei Chachamim. Mashal Anvea Geffen Binvea Geffen. It's a mashal is if you take grapevines and you merge them together, whatever you call it, you graft them together, then you have a beautiful vine that comes out of that, right? You have, which is what I guess they do for grapes, right? You take nice, good growing grapes with other ones, and you get a nice davar na'ah mitkabel. You get a nice and accepted product. But lo yisa bat amaretz, a person should not marry, if he's a Talmid Chacham, should not marry the daughter of Amaretz. Mashal, it's similar to Anvea Geffen, which is what we call good, a Talmid Chacham. Binvea Sneh, mixed with the grapes, the leaves of a bush, like a prickly bush, which together is not going to make anything very good. Davar Ka'ur. It's going to be something bad, and people will not want it. So you should try to make things better and not make them worse. So Tanur Abanan continues the Braita on the top of Amud Bet. If a person again has the choice, they should sacrifice all their money in order to marry the daughter of a Talmid Chacham. Let's say you don't have that choice. What's second best? Yisa bat Gedolei Hador. You should go for the Gedolei Hador, who are second in the hierarchy, Talmidei Chachamim. Rashi says the Gedolei Hador are people who are tzaddikim. They do good actions. They're full of chesed, but they're not necessarily learned. So they're not as learned. So seconds here. Lo matzah bat Gedolei Hador. You can't find one of them. Yisa bat Roshei Knesiyot. You should marry the daughter of someone who heads the congregation, the president, something like that. Public person. Lo matzah bat Roshei Knesiyot. Yisa bat Gabait Tzedakah. Should marry someone who's the child of a Gabait Tzedakah, because in order for someone to be a Gabait Tzedakah, they have to obviously be trustworthy, right? They can keep people's secrets. They have discretion. They're honest. So there's good traits. Lo matzah bat Gabait Tzedakah. Yisa bat Melamdei Tinokot. The teachers, so that was again, and this was true, I think, for much of history, that the ones who were Melamdei Tinokot were the ones who obviously had some knowledge, but were not the top of the hierarchy. But they are good, right? But whatever you do, lo yisa bat amei haaretz, you shouldn't marry bat amei haaretz, mipnei shehin sheketz, because an amei haaretz is sheketz, and you know how to translate sheketz, but it's usually a term we use for Ovdei Avodah Zarah, Shikutzehem, right? So we treat them that way. Unishoteim sheretz, and their wives are shratzim. None of this is nice. V'al benoteim hu omer arur shochev and kol behema. We call their children to be animals. So this is how they viewed it.
So there's nothing about wealth there. It's about midot. I mean,
that is correct.
It's kind of
right? So, yes. Tanya Rabbi Omer. Rebbe said, "Amaretz asur lechol basar." You're not allowed to feed an amaretz meat. Shenemar zot Torah behema va'of. This is the Torah, right? It says of behema and oaf. Of course, it's talking about what's kosher, but we use the word Torah to be literal. Torah. Kol ha'osek b'Torah mutar lechol basar behema va'of. Kol she'eno osek b'Torah asur lechol basar behema va'of. You're not allowed to give meat or oaf to a amaretz. Amar Rebbe Eliezer, Amaretz mutar l'nochro b'yom ha'kippurim shechal liot b'Shabbat. If you bump into an amaretz, you can stab them. Nochro, I think, means stab them even on Yom Kippur that falls out on Shabbat. No limitations.
What does that mean?
1 second. Let me read the next line. Amar lo talmidam. So students at them, Rebbe, Amar lo shochto. What do you mean nochro? It's such a gross term. It means like stab them. Say you can shech them. Sounds nicer. Amr, he said, no. Zeh ta'un bracha, v'zeh eno ta'un bracha. If you're talking about shchita, then you got to make a bracha. I don't even want to say shchita for them. I'm saying you could stab them.
No, it doesn't.
So what does that mean? I have no idea what it means.
But obviously it doesn't, you can't take this literally.
So, okay.
It's not like Rhodes or
I
something.
agree with you, but
His students thought he was literal.
I think they were just critiquing his language, right? He was saying, I want to use a bad language. So, you know, there's a Marsha here, I think it's a Marsha that I saw earlier today, says that it means, what it means is that you can embarrass them. And you know, when you embarrass someone and you bring blood to their face, we say, you know, it's like killing them, right? We said, you know, right? So that it means that you can berate them and you can call them out on their lies and their avodah zarah, whatever that means, you know.
Yeah, but it's Yom Kippur. I mean, maybe they're doing tshuva and stuff.
So, right. So I think that's the chiddush, is that if they're committed to their thing, even on Yom Kippur, you can do it. Tosfot seems to take it pretty literally, but Tosfot has to understand that it's referring to someone who's like Malshin, right? Who's out and is going to kill Jewish people because they're about to report on something. And so, you know, they're really a bad dude. And then,
then it's sakana. I mean, Tosfot.
Right, that's how Tosfot, because Tosfot does take it a little literally. Well, we'll see in the Gemara. I'll tell you where Tosfot comes in the next Gemara. But the Marsha does that. He says it's talking about metaphysically, and you're embarrassing them, and you're calling them out, and you're humiliating them. But obviously, it doesn't mean you can stab them in the head. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Am haaretz atzur litlavoti mabadera. You can't sort of go with an Am haaretz for companionship on the road for protection. Shenemar, because it says about Torah. Torah is your life and the length of your days. If Am haaretz, who at least in this context does not believe in Torah or learn Torah, clearly doesn't care about their own life because you're not committed to what Hashem says brings you life. So al chayav lochas, they don't care about their own life. They're not going to care about your life, so you can't really trust them because they don't care about humanity. So, you know, of course, this is where many come in and say that obviously what we call an Am haaretz is not what they called an Am haaretz, because, you know, they're talking about someone who says, I don't care about life, right? Obviously, what people who are not knowledgeable about Torah are not saying, I reject God's life. They just don't believe in it, right? So that's a whole different thing. But this Gemara is talking about someone, at least in this Braita, who doesn't care. They're living the way they live. They don't care about safety or security or anything. And so you shouldn't rely on them for your life because they don't even care about their own life. Amr Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amr Yochanan, Am haaretz mutar lekoro kedag. If you need to, I don't know again what this means. You can tear open an Am haaretz like a fish. You can, you know, whatever you call it. What do you call it when you cut it open? Yeah, it's not good. That's for sure, right?
That's called.
Anyways, Amr Shmuel bar Yitzchak umigabo. You could do it from the back. There's another. I heard this once upon a time that there's a Rebbe gut a fish.
Right,
Maybe there was a reason I didn't want to remember it. But that I think I heard this from Rav Kook. I don't remember seeing it, but I heard someone say that this Gemara migavo means that you can go from the back, which means you can cut open the back of the beliefs, but not the Tselem Elohim, not the face, not the, you know, that kind of language, that it's referring to the beliefs of the person and their impression, but not them. Either way. Tanya Rabbi Akiva, says Rabbi Akiva, this part is the only part that actually speaks to me a little bit. Says Rabbi Akiva, Kishayiti Am haaretz. When I used to be, remember Rabbi Akiva, before he decided to learn Torah and marry Rivka, right? He was, right, her name Rivka? Rachel, thank you, Rachel. Kishayiti Am haaretz, Amarti, I used to say, right, I hated people who learned Torah. I was totally disconnected. And I would say, Mi tenli tamid chacham v'nashchenu kichamor. Who would, you know, I wish one day I'll bump into a Talmid Chacham and I can attack him and bite him like a donkey would. Amrlo Talmidav, Rebbe, Amar Kekelev. What do you mean like a chamor? The common terminology is you bite someone like a dog. I'm no, I want it to be specifically like a chamor. Because then no sheikh v'shover etzem. Then no sheikh ve'eno shover etzem. A donkey has such strong teeth, I don't know if this is true, but I would be scared of it, and they could break bones when they bite. A dog, you know, you don't break bones, you just get cuts. So I had such hatred for people who learn Torah that I would love to have a confrontation. It sounds like he never did, right? But meaning that there was this hatred that I had from the other side.
I can understand it. I mean, given everything that they're saying about the Amei Haaretz, I could understand it.
Well, the question is who's instigating it? But yes, it's true.
It sounds like
Amarites don't learn this Gemara. I agree.
No, it sounds like the Amay Haaretz knew what was being said about them.
So it says the next Gemara. Tanya Rabbi Meir used to say, anyone who marries their child to an Amaretz or daughter, it's like you tied her up and threw her in front of a lion. Just like an Ari will just drag something and eat it. Tosa says it means Tosa says it means that they eat their prey before it's dead. So they don't even like try to kill it first. They just start eating it away. They'll just hit, abuse, and rape essentially their wives and have no humiliation, no boshet panim. Yes, you can see why the Amaretz might not like them. Tanya Amar Rebbe Eliezer Omer Imole Anu Tzrichin Lahem L'Maseh Matan. If they didn't need us for business, meaning if we weren't part of the important for the world, they would just kill all of us.
That's what it sounds like.
So that was not that we would kill them. Anyways, this is how they viewed it. Tanya
No, the Amay Haaretz thought that they would be killed.
But what Rebbe Eliezer is saying, they would kill us. But either way.
Oh, the Amay Haaretz would kill the Talmidei Chachamim
if they didn't need us. I mean, they happen to need us because we're good businessmen or we teach them or whatever. Tani Rabbi Chia says Rabbi Chia Kol Isik B'Torah Fei Am Haaretz Kilo Bo'ela Rushato B'Fanav. A person learns Torah in front of Am Haaretz. It's as if you are essentially raping or being Bo'el. They're in their fiance in front of them. Shenemar, because it says Torah Tzivalanu Moshe Morasha Kilat Yaakov. And we have a very famous limud, Altikrein Morasha, inheritance, Ela Me'orasa, a marriage essentially, a special relationship. So says Rabbi Chia, I think this is Rabbi Chia or the Gemara, Gedola Sina Shesonim Amei Haaretz Talmidei Chachamim, the hatred the Amaratzim have for Talmidei Chachamim is greater than Yoter Misina Shesonim Ovdei Kochavim et Yisrael, greater than the hatred that non-Jews have for Jews, Unishoteyem Yoter Mehem, and their wives hate Talmidei Chachamim even more than they do. Again, the way, of course, the Achronim say is that they're jealous, that there's like, they don't have access to the Torah, and their way of acting out against it is that that Talmidei Chachamim, hopefully we, are taking it from them, or taking their heritage, and they want to destroy anyone else, etc. Tana, and as the Braita said, Shana upiresh yoter mikulam. Someone who learned and then left and became an Amaretz is worse than everyone. Okay? Tanu Rabbanan continues the Braita. Shisha Amaretz. There's 6 things that were said about Amei Haaretz. First of all, Ein Moshin Len Edut. You don't trust them to get Edut for you, meaning if you're doing a transaction, you want to call over someone to witness it. You shouldn't call over an Amei Haaretz. Ein Mekablin Imenu Edut. We don't accept testimony from them. Ein Megalim Lahem Sod. You shouldn't tell them any secrets. Ein Monin Melanin Otan Apotropis Al Yitomim. You shouldn't appoint them to be a public, what do you call it?
Guardian.
A guardian for a Yitomim. You want to give them the right to oversee a kupas shel tzedakah. As we said earlier, you shouldn't rely on them for your support when you go on the road because they don't care about their own lives. How can they care about your life? The Yeshomrim, and some say, if they lose something, remember there's a mitzvah, a requirement that you should, if you find an object, that you have to announce, I found this, someone should find it. So let's say Tosa says you have a group of Amaratzim, whoever they are, and they drop an iPhone. So you know it came from them. You don't know which one. You don't have to pick it up and say, oh, someone lost the iPhone. So of course, this is where Tosa is a little bit bothered. He's like, what do you mean? You're implying if I find something, I don't have to give it back to them. So implying I can't steal something from them. I can't take anything from them. But 10 lines ago, you said I could stab them on Yom Kippur. Like what? Like so here's where Tosa says there are different categories. There are people who are out to get you. There are people who just don't know just don't know. There are people who hate Talmidei Chachamim. There's it depends on the circumstance. So
it sounds like they're not even part of the they should not be considered part of like Jewish because they're not you don't have to return a lost object to them. They're not even part of the kahal.
So that's based.
Like the God. I mean,
it says osem maseh amcha, right? You turn an aveidah to someone who acts the way you act, so you don't have to return. But it says the Tanakama, and I think this is one last point that at least you end on a higher note. The Tanakama didn't say that you shouldn't return an aveidah to an Amaretz. Why not? Because Zimnin dinafik minei zara ma'alya. because just because a person's an Amaretz does not mean that it's all over. They might end up having some good children at the end of the day, and they will benefit, they will eat whatever this thing was returned. Right? They'll gain from this. Shenemar yachin tzaddik yilvash. There are times where they prepare it and the tzaddik ends up wearing it. Meaning, don't give up on anyone. So there is hope. That's all the good I could get from this Gemara. There is hope at the end that maybe there will be children from the Amaretz. But again, this is not, the Gemara elsewhere talks about Amaretz in this terminology. I think this is really, it puts it all together in one daf together, again, as you would be banned. But that's our Gemara. So I don't think that today any of this is practically.
No, I'm not saying, but I would think about like Demai and stuff like that, where you don't trust that they took Truma and stuff like that, or
Right.
That's like, okay, they might be not punctilious, they might be a little lax, but this is like
Correct.
Not a pale.
But clearly, just from the statement that they said they would all kill us. So obviously, they had interactions with people who were not learned, who they knew weren't going to kill them, right? I think. But anyways.
Right. I mean.
But I don't know. Maybe they had very bad relations. Maybe there was like politics like today back then. I don't know.
No.
I don't know the answer.
No.
Continues the Mishnah. Let's just finish with a little bit of Gemara now that we got that Agadat out of the way. We have some more Agadat like this, not like this, but similar tomorrow. Continue the Mishnah. Anyone who left Yerushalayim was carrying some meat, right? So we said they have to go back if they didn't go past Sofim. But then the Mishnah said, how much? How much meat or how much chametz do you have to go back for? And Rabbi Meir said a kibetza, and Rabbi Yehuda said a kazayit. Says the Gemara, that seems to be opposite their opinion.
You forgot, you're out. Pesach is coming, and you went out. And you forgot you had chametz and stuff.
Pesach is coming. You went to travel to visit your friends and wherever, and you had chametz in your house. You said we have to go back if it's reshut. You don't have to go back if it's a sudat mitzvah. But the question is, what do you have to go back for? How much chametz? So Rabbi Meir said a kibetza, and Rabbi Yehuda said a kazayit, which is smaller. Says the Gemara, so that implies the memra. The Rabbi Meir suffered kibetza hu dechashiv, that a sizable amount is a kibetza, and Rabbi Yehuda suffered kazayit, nami chashiv, that even a kazayit, which is smaller, remember, than a betza, is considered respectable. But says the Gemara, Veramindu, there's a very famous Mishnah in Brachot, which we said ad kama heim zamnim, right? What shear do, or it's a bright, I guess. What shear do you have that you have to have a zimun, right? Where people eat together, they have to bench together. Said the Braita, the Tanakhama said ad kazayit, which is presumably Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yehuda said ad kibetza, which is the opposite of our Mishnah. So how do you explain that? Says Rabbi Yochanan, you're right, muchlafet hashita, you got to switch it around. Obviously, we got the wrong names on one of them because it doesn't make any sense. Rabbi Meir, I don't know which one you switch, but say Rabbi Meir says a kazayit, Rabbi Yehuda says a kibetza, it has to be consistent in both. Abaya says, no, you don't have to switch the shitas. It's not the same thing. Food is different in the context. It depends on what you're arguing about. Hatam b'kroi pli. There, by Birkat HaMazon, they're arguing based on the way you interpret a pasuk. Hacha b'svar pligi. Here, it's based on a logical argument. Hatam b'kroi pligi. There, in Birkat HaMazon, Rabbi Meir Savar, the pasuk says, v'yachalta v'savata, right? We all know the pasuk. V'yachalta v'savata v'rachta Hashem Elokecha. You eat, you're satisfied, and you branch. Now, what is it? Achalta means you eat. What does v'savata add? You're satisfied. So it says Rabbi Meir, doesn't add anything. V'achalta means zu achila, you eat, and eating is generally a kazayit. V'savata zu shtia, meaning also when you drink together. V'achila b'kazayit. Rabbi Yehuda says no. V'achalta v'savata tells you that it's not every eating. Stam eating is a kazayit. But to bench, you have to have achila and sevia and sustenance, right? And so you need a bigger shear than a kazayit. You need achila sheyesh bo sevia ve'ezuzu b'kibetza. That's bigger shear, and that's a kibetza. So by Birkat HaMazon, Rabbi Meir holds a kazayit like regular eating. Rabbi Meir holds it has to be more than that. It has to be a kibetza. But hacha by chametz and by kachin that you took outside of Yerushalayim is far pligi. It's based on a logical idea. Rabbi Meir savar chazarato ketumato. Rabbi Meir holds that because these things, at least kachim, have tum'ah, that you should treat it the way you would treat something that's tameh. If you recall, we had a halacha that we've discussed many times that mat tumato b'kibetza ochlin are only mitameh other things if it's a betza, not a kazayit, and we learned that out before. So since that's the case, af chazarato b'kibetza. Rabbi Yehuda savar, no, it doesn't depend on what you have, what is mitameh. It is chazarato ki isuro. It's what's prohibited. Ma isuro b'kizayit, just like the prohibition is always a kizayit because that's a food. Af chazarato b'kizayit. So meaning it's not connected. It's not like they always hold that eating is a kizayit or kabetza. Really, everybody agrees that eating is always a kizayit. The question by Birkat HaMazon is that there's a special pasuk there, v'chalta v'savata, which might imply more than that. And the issue over here is logically, do you compare it to tum'ah, which is a higher share, a bigger share of a kibetza, or isser, which is a lower share of a kizayit? And Tanya, just one last line, maybe Natan Omer, which is not an opinion we had in our Mishnah, but which is another Tana. Zev zev kishtei beitzim. It has to be 2 beitzim. It's not clear to me why, but lo hodulo chachamim. The chachamim did not agree, and so they didn't paskin that way. But that is the rationale for the different shiurim in the Mishnah. And we're going to stop here, and tomorrow we'll get to Agadata. It will be a lot nicer Agadata, I think. But
I like this Agadata. It's just very.
it's easier, right? But it's a little troubling, right? So anyways, tomorrow, the first half of the daf at least will be Agadata, and we'll see the second half gets back to Pesach. Shukran chal, Shavua tov.
Thank you. Shavua tov.
See you tomorrow morning at 7:30, I hope.
They will.
See everyone at 8 o'clock.